One of the things that GeoVax is known for is its MVA platform, and you told me a little bit about the history of it, which is kind of interesting. I guess it was originated in Turkey. Maybe it's modified Vaccinia Ankara, right?
Guided out of Germany.
Okay, started in Germany, then moved to Turkey. It's a global platform. So it started in Germany, and then I guess they modified it, and then it's able to accommodate multiple antigens inside of it, which makes it very useful compared to single antigen vaccines. How have you taken that platform and run with it, so to speak?
Well, the value of MVA has always been that it's a very large virus with a large encoding capacity, meaning you can add multi-antigens in there. We've done up to 5 before on vaccine candidates, and that's why we've used MVA for the development of vaccines against HIV, for Zika virus, for the hemorrhagic fever viruses, Ebola Zaire, Ebola Sudan.
So it's pretty much good for everything?
We've used even in a cancer. We used it where we in vivo generate virus-like particles targeting a tumor-associated antigen, in this case MAC1. That's actually what drove us to thinking about cancer as our company.
Right, and I think you used to have a cancer MAC1 drug.
Yes, we have. We have that, but we've moved because of Gedeptin and the value of that. We've moved forward with that as our priority. Doesn't mean we necessarily are abandoning that concept of utilizing it in there. So there are a lot of good applications for that. As a it's a vaccine in and of itself, but it also it induces it's not only strong antibodies but also T cells inherently. So it has its own, it's almost what we refer to as self-adjuvanting, because it is in fact a virus and a vaccine that induces certain immune responses. No, most vaccine platforms are simply platforms. Until you take a targeted pathogen and put it into mRNA, you've just got sort of a naked platform. Doesn't do anything. But if you put MVA in the body, it's going to stimulate immune responses because it'll do that against orthopox viruses. So that includes smallpox, it includes mpox, it includes horsepox, camelpox. There's different poxes. There's there's a genus of poxes, so to speak. And so that's what it does. So it has that value in there. And it also does not require extreme frozen state in a cold chain supply. It can be lyophilized, so it can be freeze dried.
Which is one of the big problems.
Exactly.
Out there, especially like in Africa. Actually, I was reading a WHO statistic recently that was talking about half of all vaccines are lost either to expiration or improper handling.
Exactly.
So it sounds like there'd be a lot less of that with the MVA. Is that your take?
Very much so. It's a great point, because we've gone back and tested vaccines that were over 5 years old and they still retain their performance as they should have. So that type of thing. We know that, for instance, with mRNA, I know they're working to improve it, but it was minus 80 degrees Fahrenheit and only good for 4 to 6 hours when it was thawed. I can remember reading about, in one case of Moderna, their vaccine, they had to destroy over $100 million in value of vaccines because they had thought they were past the 6-hour type time frame. So you have these challenges. So it's a very versatile vaccine platform, both from the standpoint of utilizing it, as well as what I always say, at the end of the day, a vaccine or a product is only as good as it can be enabling you to distribute it and have it actually administered wherever it needs to be worldwide. I was told that years ago. It's one thing to develop a product, but if you can't ship it and they can't distribute it and you can't
get it where it needs to go,
exactly,
then what's
and then
the
utilize it, then what good is it? And yet MVA fits all of those criteria, and that's why we're so excited about the big roadblock for MVA was always the manufacturing process. And that's what we think we have been able to resolve and validate. We've released a lot of our data that showed that we had validated the performance of the continuous cell line. We didn't disclose what cell line it was until we had successfully licensed it, so we have broad use of that cell line for all of our MVA products. It's from ProBiogen out of Berlin, Germany. It's the AGE1 cell line. It's basically a retinal duct cell line. So that's what it comes from. But it has a lot of very positive performance in it, and that's why we're excited about it.
You mentioned lyophilization, which is basically freeze drying. And it's very useful because you can pretty much transport it. I don't think you need to worry too much about temperature as long as it's not too extreme. How do you take that and actually, I guess, reconstitute it? Are you familiar with that process and kind of how they actually get it? I assume they still inject it.
You have to reconstitute it, probably in sterile water or something, solution such as that. I'm not an expert on it, but I'm familiar of lyophilization. I've dealt with other products that have been freeze-dried or lyophilized before. So there's a reconstitution process which can be done locally, and what I would say, and sort of, if you're in Africa, it can be done in a local healthcare hut. It doesn't require freezers, doesn't require special equipment, no. But then you can reconstitute it, administer it, and you can get the people vaccinated who need to be vaccinated.
Yeah. I was going to bring up a current event that was recently announced, and probably as most people know, we hear the headline, and it's really a long way from actually being what it will eventually be. But there was talk about requiring placebo control for all vaccines, which for some vaccines like smallpox or whatever like that, the virus doesn't change very much, so you can use the same one for a long time. And actually, smallpox doesn't really exist anymore either. But for the flu vaccine, for the COVID vaccine, where the virus is mutating rapidly, and every year you have a different strain to worry about, what do you think this would this cause some great hurdles to timely production, the timely and cost-effective production of vaccines for the annual flu season or COVID season?
It has the potential of being highly disruptive, and I'm sure even those who are advocating for clinical trials realize the critical importance of being able to address that issue successfully. Now, in some instances, as you know, when you're dealing with certain viruses, they use the animal rule because you can fastly test on there, and the virus is such that you'd never want to do a placebo-controlled in humans, so you have to do that. The challenge with influenza vaccine, when you think about it, think of a timeline of an annual basis. I used to be in this business, so I can remember.
Right.
And so you're suddenly told that, okay, this is the strain we're going with for this year.
Right.
And so the manufacturers,
which is like maybe in like April or something for December.
No, it's even later.
Oh, no.
It's even later. So you're told. You're told later. Okay, this is what we're going with, and it's a sprint. It's not a marathon.
Yeah, right.
And because you do a couple of things at that point. The technical people go, they've got to then refine their basis of their influenza vaccine, let's say, or their COVID-19 vaccine, if we're using that as an example. And so you've got to do the new construct. That's not done overnight. Maybe some technical issues, this and that and whatever. So you've got to get that done. And at the same time, you've got your sales force out taking orders because you want to lock that up before your competitors do. So it's a real challenge that you have to go forward with. When you think of the timelines, those who are actively in, for instance, the influenza marketplace today, what I'm hearing from them, my colleagues who are in that marketplace, and I'll be seeing some of them next week actually in D.C. I'll be there with them. So with them, there's not enough time to update the construct, do the clinical evaluation, and then be able to do the manufacturing and be prepared in advance of when you want to start being able to deliver product. So whatever you say will be the start of the vaccinating timeline, you work back from that, and it simply doesn't seem to compute because that clinical evaluation becomes much more complicated. Now, the argument is, and I can understand it, is that in influenza, we've had influenza vaccines for decades.
Right.
So they've basically been around, and we're just updating the construct. And based on various parameters, it's been accepted that updated in that manner will give us a vaccine. And there have been some years in which we've learned afterwards that the vaccine we all took to be vaccinated for the flu season simply was very low in efficacy. And other years it seemed to be better. And it doesn't eliminate the risk of getting the flu. What it gives you is a much milder sort of experience with the flu or with COVID we'd like to see. So that's really what you want to have someone who's got, I'll just say, who has a little bit of symptoms and a sniffle rather than someone who's at the risk of severe disease, hospitalization, or the risk of death.
I guess it just gives their immune system just a chance to catch up, right? Get a head start on it, right?
And the timeline working backwards, if you sort of want to say, I want to always be able to start vaccinating people and driving them to the CVSs or wherever the world, their doctor's offices, they're getting a vaccine. If I want to start that at a certain time period and I work back, there's a certain period that it'll take to update the construct. Now you've got to make sure and do your process development to be able to go into that manufacturer and produce a sufficient product to be able to do the clinical stage. It looks like there may not be enough time. So that's going to be a challenge. And I think that I completely believe it'll be successfully resolved so we can have updated vaccines as we need them for different respiratory illnesses now.
Well, you make me think of something else. Years ago, we always used chicken eggs for the flu vaccine. But I think there's some advanced techniques, including, your platform, that are much faster. Can you talk about the kind of the evolution of the production of vaccines and how it may have compressed that timeline over time?
Yes. Well, everybody used to use chicken eggs. And as opposed to taking the cells out as we do for our MVA, for Mpox and all, you grew in the chicken eggs.
Yeah.
Invariably, there'd be one of the competitors or manufacturers would end up having something go wrong with their chicken egg. And they'd be out for the entire season, which meant the remaining players had to increase their production to be able to cover for that. Otherwise, there wouldn't be enough product out there. So you'd always go through that. And you couldn't predict when it was going to go, when you were going to have a bad lot and those types. It migrated to the cell line type of system. So it sort of sounds like what we're talking about today with MVA, because we went to MDCK cell line. So we converted to those, the industry did. So you're doing that. So the idea is, if you can go to a method, and so where you can have a cell line, because a cell line can be kept in the freezer and then do that. And that's the basic engine for doing manufacturing, for growing what you need. The challenge will be doing new constructs and then evaluating that new construct to show that in a placebo-controlled environment that you can be able to do that. You can do faster in terms of going up and doing your manufacturing by doing cell line basis, but you've got to be able to have a product, and if it's in a placebo-controlled, that's going to create a real challenge.
Yeah. How long do one of those trials generally take place for? Because I think what you're waiting for is someone to just catch it randomly, right? And then you look at the placebo arm and the active arm, and you just look at the percent difference there, because you're assuming that some people are just going to be exposed to the virus, right?
And my guess is they'd use certain viral markers also.
Okay. So they don't have to actually get sick. They just test.
But if you're going to do placebo-controlled, it means you're also going to look at ultimate sort of actual efficacy in that.
Okay.
I was, as you were speaking, it makes me think, because I've been asked this a couple of times, and I don't really. Others will have to figure out what would the length of the trial be.
Okay.
I was trained 100 years ago. My education was in biostatistics and mathematical statistics. So I guess there was a time that maybe I could contribute to that thinking. I certainly couldn't today. But you'd have to have a legitimate time of exposure.
Sure. Yeah.
So you would say that it's irrelevant to have someone on a placebo type. And I think that therein lies the challenge of how long that will be. And let's say if you were able to have the determination of this is the clade or the strain we're going with. So if you had that and it was April and you want to start vaccinating people, let's say by the 20th of September, middle or 20th of September, if you work back that's not a lot of time to be able to prepare, do the construct, do a placebo-controlled trial. I personally don't know how it could be done.
Yeah.
So you have to have some type of markers.
Yeah. 2025 started out with a lot of kind of viral infections going around. We had Mpox, we had Marburg in Africa, I think we had Ebola somewhere, we had the measles here. We even had the very interesting one with Gene Hackman's wife catching some rodent-based virus. So, it's been maybe a good year for viruses, but a bad year for humans. What do you see as some of the top health threats that are facing the U.S. And the world right now?
I think when I think of health risk, there's so many out there. I tend to focus on infectious threats because that's the world I sort of work in, that type.
Right.
Obviously, cancers are always a hit. It's heterological, as we all know, so it's a real challenge, and that means that there's need and room for a lot of innovation and different approaches in that area. In infectious diseases, one thing that will be with us forever is the continued evolution of viruses.
Yeah.
They evolve, they change, We deal with diseases today that when I was a child, we'd never heard of HIV or AIDS,
Right,
that type
right.
of thing.
Yeah.
And yet it became very predominant now. Fortunately, because of antiviral drugs that seem to be effective now, people who are diagnosed with HIV can live a meaningful life. It used to be much different now. So I think the value of, let's call it either pandemic preparedness or the continued staying abreast of and in advance of what, and being able to have early warning pickup systems to be able to address certain things. We just heard week before last the first report in wastewater of Mpox virus. That was in Greenville, North Carolina, of all places. No. We were at the World Vaccine Congress when when that news came out, and everybody's saying, well, Greenville, North Carolina, you know, what's going on here? What that's showing you is the way the world is today, from a migratory basis. Vaccines have the greatest, viruses, I should say, have the greatest times of their lives now because they can get on a plane, which they used to not be able to. They're not Mpox is not isolated in Western Africa. It may be concentrated there, and it may be endemic there. But we're hearing reports in Georgia, we're hearing in North Carolina and New York, throughout there, and I'm being told by WHO that don't slow down what you're doing, because this is going to continue to mutate, it's going to continue to evolve, and this threat's going to be a bigger challenge, not a lesser challenge. And I think with certain infectious threats, we have to increasingly be aware of that and utilize technologies that we can speed up. MVA used to be relegated to just sort of stockpiling products because the manufacturing was so slow. You couldn't respond to epidemics and pandemics. We believe that we may well be advancing the game changer for that, so that people who can utilize MVA for infectious diseases for the reasons we all want it to be broader, multi-antigen, freeze-dried, all of those types of components with greater durability you tend to get with MVA. But if you can't manufacture it fast enough to be able to deliver what you want to, then it's an academic exercise. And that's what we've been addressing. We started addressing that over 5 years ago. And we said we either got to solve this, or we got to have another technology, or we're going to be relegated to niche types of markets and stockpiling. And we feel like we've been successful in that, and that's why we're now in the process of development of a new manufacturing. But I think when you ask that question, I can't predict what those might be, but some of the viruses that we hear about that are in places that we can only think about because they're so far away, they're coming closer and closer to home. Because what occurs in South America, for instance, used to be a long way, but they're now
it's moving up, migrating.
Here.
Like chikungunya,
chikungunya. We got Zika virus.
Zika
virus is related to dengue and all these things. So all those things become things that we all need to work on and be pursuing.
Let me. We're almost to the end here, but one of the things you made me think of while you're talking about finding the Mpox in the wastewater is what are our early warning systems, I guess, globally? I mean, the organizations and the mechanisms of early warning.
Yeah, I think this early warning as the wastewater system is really an interesting one.
Yeah,
never had heard about it until we got into all this COVID type stuff.
Yeah, I never heard about it either.
And it's a great idea because it's something that can let us know is a virus
population-wide.
Exactly.
It's population-wide too.
You just need to have the sampling system. Used to be you had to look for symptoms. So you'd have people in sites, WHO sites, all over the world. Still have them, but now you need to be collecting wastewater and doing those types of things. So you need to be looking at that. Lifestyle is another early warning system. It can then help you if you understand sort of the nature of a virus and it has certain lifestyle components such as HIV or Mpox, et cetera, then you can also sort of concentrate from that standpoint. So you can look at it from there. So we look at a system where there will be, think of it as nodes all over the world that may be sampling of wastewater and other types of things, all feeding into big data systems. The data centers.
We could get AI to help us out too, right?
So all these places they're building in Texas, for instance, these big AI centers. So those will be in there, and they'll just be continuously crunching the data, feeding them out. What we're benefiting from now is there's an organization, I have no association with it other than being a subscriber. It's called Airfinity. Airfinity came into being during the early 2020 because of the COVID.
Okay, so it's like air filtering or something?
Airfinity. No.
Okay. Well,
they're a data analytics company.
Oh, okay.
And they originally
it sounded like you're filtering their viruses out of the air.
They originally became the purveyor of information about COVID-19.
Okay.
All over the world.
Okay.
Who's doing what? Where's the virus showing up? What population? They've now expanded to all infectious disease.
Okay.
And we literally, as a subscriber, which I'm not advocating, people can make that trend, but we get it every morning, it's on the computer, we're hearing about everything. Some of the diseases, many of the diseases they're talking about, we aren't pursuing because we're a small company, we're focused on, but it gives us all the updates and we can pick up on information about what's going on. What's the latest? Every day, what's the latest on Mpox worldwide? Who else is working on it? What is their approaches? So from a perspective of a company that's developing products or from a public health group, I originally learned about them through the public health sector, not from a commercialization standpoint, but it was where can I get information about it? This time it was this new virus that's emerging.
Data aggregator
Exactly.
for viral threats.
So all of that's coming together because their data now feeds into some systems at WHO and others.
Okay. Okay. Great. Well, thanks, David. That was a great rundown of a whole variety of things for the vaccine world. For everyone watching, we had David Dodd, who is the CEO of GeoVax Labs, ticker symbol GOVX.